A number of years ago, way before I ever came here, actually decades ago, there was a woman who was also who lived in town, but also associated with this church by the name of Hope. And unfortunately, in her mid-30s, she ended up getting MS, which is a very difficult condition where the autoimmune system attacks the nerve centers and the brain can't signal properly to the muscles. And so the very movement of the body and eventually the very presence of gravity can make life incredibly, incredibly difficult. Yet people who I talked to who know her said she was someone who, when you came across her, would make you smile, whose presence would even shine. And one person told me a story about how one of her sons would bring her to the pool on a regular basis, both for aquatic therapy, which if those of you who have gone through this and needed this, it really helps mitigate the pressures and the issues of gravity when you're starting to get that back. But then once that was done, he would just hold her in the water. Just hold her, let her float for a moment, not having to deal with trying to get her muscles or her hands or her feet or her mouth to do anything but just lay in the water to eliminate the feeling of gravity on her body and just for a little while to feel free of some of those burdens she felt. Imagine the intimacy of that. The beauty, the mercy, the love, the compassion in that moment of just being held in that water. And that same son who I had the opportunity to talk to said how he could tell that she was smiling, not because he would see her, but because sometimes when he was pushing her in the wheelchair, he would see people coming towards them like 100 feet, 100 yards away, and they'd be kind of down and looking down and like frustrated, maybe even talking to themselves, and then all of a sudden they would look up and they would be smiling. And he knew that she was smiling and connected with them and gave them some sense of joy, not because he saw her, but he saw her reflection in their face. Because even though she was not cured, she was whole. Have you ever met somebody who wasn't cured but was made whole? Most people want to be cured. Do you know anybody who's been cured but never been whole? This is a person who's never cured but found a way to be whole. And so even though she couldn't stand, she could rise and she could shine and reflect that to other people. But what does that have to do with the passage that was just read today? Well, let's dig into the Gospel according to John, chapter 5, verses 2 through 9, and see what is in here for us today. Verse 2 reads, "Now in Jerusalem by the sheep gate there is a pool called Bethesda." Let's talk about this for a second. Del, could you throw the first slide up there? This is what was being referred to. This is the sheep gate. If you can go to the second slide. If you look to the right and to the left of the arch, you can see some figures that are carved in there. Those don't look like sheep. They are not sheep. This is actually called the Lion's Gate. Right? And I had the privilege to be there a year ago and 6 years ago and to be at this spot. So why is it called the Sheep's Gate? If it's actually the Lion's Gate, why do they call it the Sheep's Gate? Because back then, just on the other side of this area was the sheep market, where you could go if you were coming to do a sacrifice at the temple to buy a sheep if you didn't have an unblemished sheep yourself to offer for the sacrifice. Or if you had your animal, you had your sheep that you were bringing, you would go through here to go towards the temple to prepare it and prepare yourself for the sacrifice that would take place. And very close to there was this place called the Pool of Bethesda. And Bethesda means house of mercy, house of grace, house of healing, depending on the translation and the overall meaning. Has anybody ever been to or heard of a hospital, Bethesda? That's where it gets its name. House of healing, house of mercy, house of grace. And then we hear, so this is the pool we're talking about. Last slide. And this is the actual location. It's not the complete location, but this is the part that has been excavated. It was discovered a little over 100 years, and archaeologists and others have been working on this, and there's a series of underground pools of water. You can still get to the same water from the same springs that was there if you want to do it. And what was believed at that time, these were healing pools. And some of you are aware, if you're into holistic medicine or not, there are certain types of water that have certain minerals and things that will be healing if you sit in them. I had the opportunity to go lay in the Dead Sea, which has an incredible amount of minerals, and I literally, this is no joke, I had cuts on my body when I went in. I didn't inflict them myself. They weren't deep. I'm not trying to make it sound like some kind of crazy miracle, but I went in with cuts. I came out without them. I'm not saying like the Holy Spirit all of a sudden came down on me and shone and cleared up all my cuts, but this water did that. So these were like those kind of things. People went there to get healed. But one of the things that took place, it was an intermittent spring. And so every once in a while, the spring would bubble up. And that's what was being referred to when he said the waters were stirred and that kind of thing. And people believed or thought, or the tradition was, that either when the spring came up or angels were troubling the water, depending on which Bible that you have, that angels would trouble the water, and that the healing powers of this pool were even more strong at that particular moment. And the first person who got in would get the most healing from getting in there. Now, and it says there are a lot of people, so a lot of people would go there just for regular healing. People who are perfectly healthy would go to these pools, and it says, in there lay many invalid, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And one person had been there for 38 years, and Jesus came along and knew he'd been there a long time. Jesus didn't have any miraculous, he didn't know he was exactly there for 38 years. It was just obvious that this person had been there for a long time. But one of the questions, some of the people there were there with illnesses, but some of the people were with different kinds of conditions. And depending on the translation of the word, sometimes the word is there were people who were ill there. Sometimes it says people who were invalid, and sometimes it says people who were impotent. I don't mean it in the modern translation of the term as we currently think of it. It is in terms of the first definition of impotent, meaning incapable of making effective decision, incapable of taking positive and constructive action in their lives. So the question comes up as we go through this passage, is this person just ill? Or are they incapable, for one reason or another, of taking effective action in their lives, and so in some sense are paralyzed and remain there as a result? And so Jesus comes along, this individual, and says, one of the most curious things I have heard in the Bible. Do you want to be made well? Isn't that the reason everybody is there? You're there at these pools for the purpose of healing. The man himself says, look, I couldn't get to the troubled waters. Clearly, he's supposed to be there to get healing. And Jesus is like, do you want to be made well? But sometimes in the Bible, we don't get to hear the tone of Jesus. And I wasn't there either, so I don't know the tone. But I'm going to introduce something and see how this feels. Because I think Jesus said something like this. Do you want to get well? Are you really here to be well? Do you even want to get well? See the difference between the focus on the well and or the focus on the want. Dude, do you want to get well? Are you actually here to get well? And another word for well in this is whole. Some Bible translations have whole instead of well. Do you want to be made whole? And see, there's a difference in what Jesus will do and what that means when Jesus says, do you want to be made whole? Because Jesus will cure you, but you have to get in the partnership to be made whole. It's a two-way street to be made whole. So Jesus says, do you want to be made whole? Or do you just want to stay here because you've always been here? You've gotten used to be here. and this is who you've become. And so we go on in the passage. And we see, so Jesus asked that question, do you want to be made well? And the guy says, yes, 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 please make me well, right? Is that what he said? Nope. Do you want to be made well? Sir. Doesn't even know it's Jesus, that's fine. You don't have to know it's Jesus. But just remember that. It's not a belief in Jesus that cures him. He doesn't have this big faith that heals him. That's not what goes on here. Do you want to be made well? Sir, I have no one to put me to the pool. And while I'm making my way, someone else jumps down ahead of me. Do you want to be made well? Here's his answer, but. Excuse. Rationale. Excuse. Do you want to be made well? But. And Jesus is like, get up. I don't know that he said it like that. It's more entertaining when he says it like that, and it kind of makes sense, though. Like, get up. Maybe he got down on a knee and was like, get up, take your mat, and walk. Get up, take your mat, and walk. And he's cured. Not because of his faith, not because this person believed in Jesus, because he didn't know it was Jesus. We know that because even later he learns it's Jesus later. We learn that more in the story, that later he learns it's Jesus. He doesn't come back. There's no gratitude. There's no huge faith. There's no huge belief. None of that. Jesus just cures him. Gets up and walks. But is that the end of the story? See, I like to envision the end of the story. And there's not a lot more about the end of the story. He finds out it's Jesus, and then he goes and tells the religious leaders it's Jesus, and the religious leaders go and give Jesus a hassle. That's how this portion of the story ends. But I'm asking about what happens to him after, which is not told. But I wonder about what happened to him after. After he is cured, but does he choose to become whole? I was talking to some people here in the congregation. How many people here, you don't have to raise your hand, but just you think about this. How many of you have met someone who would rather be sick? I do. One person told me a story about someone that they knew was happier when they were in the hospital, because that's when they would get more attention from people. I'm not making fun of this person, right? But some people don't want to be whole. It's too scary. It's too much a change of who they've been and who they don't understand how to become. As a matter of fact, Jesus' whole purpose is to make people whole. Not by touching them and saying, okay, now you're whole. He never did that. He healed people and then said, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to go back into community. When Jesus healed the Gerasene demoniac, the one who called himself Legion because there were so many voices, and he was chained outside of the town because he wasn't allowed in the community, and he cured him, that person begged Jesus to follow him and be a disciple, and Jesus said, no, I need you to go back into your community because that's where you will become complete. Back with your community. When he healed the 7 lepers and only one came back to thank him, he had sent them all to go to the priests. Why to the priests? Because they were the ones, not to show off, not so Jesus could go, na, see what I can do, priest, and you can't do. It wasn't about that. It's because they had to go there to get the certification that their skin condition was clean so they could get back into community and become whole again. Jesus wants each of you to have the invitation to become whole, and Jesus is there for you. Whether you've been hurting for 38 hours, 38 minutes, 38 days, 38 months, 38 years, Jesus will be there and will respond to help you on the hurts and the things that you are carrying that are making gravity hard to deal with in this world. whether it's physical gravity or spiritual gravity or emotional gravity or baggage or other things that are having you bent down like this so your muscles don't work right and your spiritual self doesn't work right and your brain isn't working right and your emotional self isn't working right because the world's got you all twisted up and things have so many things that have got you bent over and it's difficult to do. And Jesus says, walk into the pool with me. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. And I'll do my part, but you have a choice too. You have a part in this yourself. Will you walk into the pool with me and trust me? And lay down in that water and let me hold you? I don't know what you're dealing with, or maybe right now you're not dealing with anything. Maybe everything's going fantastic, and that's great. So be there for the people for who it's not right now. But for the people, for anybody of you who's holding on to something, you don't have to close your eyes if you don't want to, but just imagine you with this burden that's got you weighed down, bending you from being who you would like to be or who God calls you to be. And Jesus is saying, just walk with me in this nice, warm, healing water. And lay back and let me hold you. And feel his hands on your back. Feel him moving you gently around this healing water, the weight of those burdens drifting away, melting away in this water. The intimacy of that love that Jesus has for you, but the trust that you need to put in to fall back into that water and drop into his arms to help you become whole. Jesus will do his part every single time. I've seen it over and over and over and over and over and over again. Will you trust him to be made whole? Amen.